When we come across a fascinating person, we naturally want to know more about him or her. The same generally goes for characters in fiction. We as audience members are curious as to how certain individuals become who they are. So, when Hannibal Lecter simultaneously frightened and captivated viewers around the world, there were many who wondered just how he started out. If only they knew of the disappointment that awaited. Let's take a look at Hannibal Rising.
So, does this mean we're going back to the beginning?
Oh no, Pumbaa, no. We're going way back to before the beginning.
Our story begins in Lithuania during World War II. When their parents are killed in the conflict between the Nazis and the Soviet Union, Hannibal and his sister Misha take refuge in their family cottage. One day, a group of looters, led by Vladis Grutas, invade the cottage and resort to cannibalizing Misha in order to survive. 8 years later, Hannibal escapes from the orphanage he was placed in and goes to live with his aunt, the Lady Murasaki. While studying at a French medical school, Lecter picks up the trail of the men responsible for the death of his sister. Seeking revenge, he begins hunting them down one by one, transforming into the killer we all love to hate. Now, if that story sounds at all exciting, just you wait. Its execution leaves much to be desired. I was not prepared for how bad this was. It's not even enjoyably awful like Batman and Robin, it's just a thoroughly disheartening experience that saps any enthusiasm I had for the title character. It makes Hannibal the movie look like Silence of the Lambs by comparison. Who wrote this garbage? Wait, are you kidding me? Thomas Harris, the author of the whole series, wrote the screenplay for this, sabotaging his creation in the process.
Oh, no. You were doing fine.
Not only does this undermine the impact of the Lecter character, but it doesn't even really show us how he became the cannibalistic psychiatrist we've all come to know. Over the course of the narrative, there isn't much in the way of progression or change with Hannibal. Sure, we see him as a kid and then as a student, but the movie doesn't show what happens in between, it just jumps forward in time. If he went through any visible arc as an adult, then that would be one thing. However, when the film cuts to this point in his life, he seems to already have the mindset of a serial killer, he just hasn't taken anyone's life yet. If you think that sounds rushed, then you're only scratching the surface of the problems in this area. After moving at a snail's pace for most of its runtime,
It's so boring.
the film suddenly kicks it into high gear during the third act. This inconsistency goes hand in hand with Hannibal's so-called growth, which, as I said before, is not handled well. When he finally tastes human blood for the first time, it just comes out of nowhere, completely devoid of any prior setup. Wouldn't it have been interesting if he acquired this trait during medical school? Well, too bad, because that's another potentially compelling part of Lecter's life that's just glossed over. That's essentially how the whole movie plays out. Instead of focusing on Hannibal's character and showing us how his personality and intelligence developed over the course of his life, the filmmakers simply give us a run-of-the-mill revenge plot and use it as an excuse to show a few gruesome deaths. What a waste. However, in spite of the terrible script, I do have to give credit to Gaspar Ulliel as Lecter. The material definitely doesn't do him any favors, but he does manage to give a nuanced and charismatic performance that really conveys the calculating intensity that you'd expect from the character. He gives it his all, and I respect that. I could easily see him as a young Hannibal Lecter in a better story. The other members of the cast, though, leave a mixed impression at best. Gong Li is fine as Lady Murasaki, but her character is just so bland and emotionless most of the time that there's very little she can do. The same goes for Dominic West as the inspector who begins to suspect Hannibal of his vengeful deeds. He tries to lend a sharpness and determination to this role, but he barely gets anything to work with because his character is just so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Instead, much of our time is spent with the exceedingly irritating villains responsible for eating Hannibal's sister. As despicable as this act is, though, these guys could have been somewhat sympathetic. Imagine if they were just a band of regular soldiers, fresh from the front lines, who had exhausted every other option and had to resort to cannibalism in order to survive. What if that terrible choice haunted them for the rest of their days? Nope. Just make them completely boring, one-dimensional, and interchangeable. They're the bad guys. We have to make Lecter likable by comparison. At least Kevin McKidd tries to add some humanity to his part, so he fares a bit better than the rest, Rhys Ifans, on the other hand, is a cartoon character. He is so over the top and pointlessly disgusting that he's impossible to take seriously as the main antagonist. On the upside, I can definitely say that the movie is made competently enough by Peter Weber. He directs with a reasonable amount of skill and a slow and steady hand, making good use of different angles and shadows to strengthen the atmosphere. Working in conjunction with this are the accomplished production values, which do manage to sell the period setting. Many of the sets, costumes, and locations look very authentic and harshly realistic. In addition, the sorrowful and exotic music by these two composers, whose names I'm not going to butcher, is perfectly serviceable, even if it's not as memorable as the other movies. So, from a technical standpoint, the movie is fairly admirable, but the finished package just has too many factors working against it. In the end, although Hannibal Rising boasts impressive production values, decent direction, and a fittingly eerie musical score, it ultimately falls victim to a horrible script, hit-or-miss performances, inconsistent pacing, and an utter failure to live up to its potential. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, and/or comment. Until next time.